Good day. Today I would like to share a reading or writing about Maundy Thursday. Maundy Thursday is celebrated in different ways in the Christian church. For some churches, there is a morning service. For some churches, there is an evening service. And for different churches, there are different ways of remembering this particular time in Jesus' life, as well as the life of his disciples. Jesus had explained to his disciples some time before, when they were alone with him, about this time. But one has to wonder if they, like me, may not even have remembered it. This is recorded in Mark chapter 9. Let me share these verses with you, verses 30 through 32. It says, Jesus didn't want anyone to know their whereabouts, for he wanted to teach his disciples. He told them, "The Son of Man is about to be betrayed to some people who want nothing to do with God. They will murder him. 3 days after his murder, he will rise alive." They didn't know what he was talking about, but were afraid to ask him about it. And that's from the Message translation. This was some time before the last week of Jesus' crucifixion. I am not sure exactly where it was on the timeline of Jesus' life. But as I pondered these verses, I wondered to myself, would I have understood what Jesus was saying? How would I have reacted? We often forget that the 12 disciples were human, just like you and I. They had no vision. They had no extraordinary revelation that we are aware about as to what was ahead of them when they chose to accept the call to follow Jesus and be his disciples. Earlier this week, we celebrated the entrance of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem for the celebration of the Passover feast. He was active in the city, and it says he spent time teaching in the temple area during these days. But now the time is at hand. How is your time at hand? How is my time at hand? How do we think about this phrase in regards to where we are in our walk with God, or even in our time as we are getting ready to celebrate his death and resurrection, and for what it means in our personal walk with Jesus? As this week has progressed in 2022, each one of us will have had and continue to have different experiences in our lives, as well as different ways of observing and remembering this time with Jesus. For some of us, we may be facing restrictions in our celebrations or remembrances due to the continued issues with the pandemic, issues with health concerns that limit our mobility, issues with war, political and even religious unrest in some countries, some areas, and some may even be fearing persecution of some kind, maybe political, maybe it's religious persecution, maybe it's racial discrimination or persecution. It could be so many kinds. This may not be a time This may be a time when we take the time to sit in the presence of the Spirit, allowing him to minister not only to our own personal spirit, but also to be open to the Spirit's guidance in how we can embrace and pray for God's presence and strength to help those who are facing difficulty at this time. This night was also a solemn night for Jesus, as he knew that Judas would no longer be among his followers. His heart was broken already for Judas, yet Jesus did not reprimand him, nor did Jesus ridicule him in front of the other disciples. Instead, Jesus released Judas. I personally have struggled with this letting go of Judas. And as I struggle with it, I find myself realizing it is all about the free will that God allows each one of us to have. And I have to ask myself, am I willing, like Jesus, to allow each person to make their decision in how they follow God or follow Jesus? This was also considered the time that Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. How did Judas react and or feel when Jesus was washing his feet? What might have been the conversation between Judas and Jesus at that time, if there was any? And if Jesus wanted to call Judas out, why didn't he do it then, rather than seemingly in front of the other 11? So as you and I sit imagining Jesus washing our feet today, before celebrating the communion meal with him, what may it be that Jesus may be praying over each one of us? I would also like to share some verses from Matthew 26. It says, "On the first of the days of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and said, 'Where do you want us to prepare your Passover meal?' Jesus said, 'Enter the city, go up to a certain man and say, "The teacher says my time is near. I and my disciples plan to celebrate the Passover meal at your house." The disciples followed Jesus' instructions to the letter and prepared the Passover meal. Then verse 26, during the meal, Jesus took and blessed the bread. He broke it and gave it to his disciples. "Take, eat, this is my body." Taking the cup and thanking God, he gave it to them. "Drink this, all of you. This is my blood, God's new covenant poured out for many people for the forgiveness of sins. I'll not be drinking wine from this cup again until that new day when I'll drink wine with you in the kingdom of my Father." They sang a hymn and went directly to the Mount of Olives. The final walk to Gethsemane. What must that walk have been like that night so long ago? Was it a time of total silence? Everyone alone with their own thoughts? May there have been some weeping? Would there have been some whispering among them? Would they have been clustered close together, close to their master in hopes to maybe protect him, or hear a word or two of hope? What must the face of the master look like on that path? Would it show the occasional tear on his cheek that slipped from his eye? Were his footsteps slow, maybe a bit uncertain at times? Or did he walk with a hurried step to meet with his Father? The only one who completely understood his heart of agony. Was it totally dark already? Or was the sun in its final setting moments? Were there any lights along the way? Or did the Master know the path so well no other light was needed? Everyone was becoming more weary with each step. How far into the garden are we going, they may have wondered. Then as they entered the garden, he told them they could stay there and watch, while he took Peter, James, and John with him a little farther. Then he too told Peter, James, and John they could sit down, but he told them to be alert and pray. And then the agony began for the Master, as he now began to face the reality of beginning the time where he would be alone. Not only alone on the earth, but to face that point of taking on the sin of humanity and then being alone without the Father's presence. He prayed. He prayed some more. He wept. The tears flowed from his eyes. He was sweating in agony. So much so his capillaries burst and drops of blood fell from his face in overwhelming grief. It was there, my Jesus, your Jesus, the disciples' Jesus, the Jesus of the world, began his intense suffering that ended in physical human death. And he sought the one and only one, his Father, for the strength to make it through, declaring, "Not my will, but your will be done, O Father." And with that commitment, he was then prepared to walk the final steps through the torturing trial and crucifixion for all of humanity from the beginning of time to the end. Amen.